Hi, welcome to Tonnau Talks. We are part of the Educational Psychology Service for Neath Port Talbot Local Authority. My name's Dr. Caris John. I'm a Senior Specialist Educational Psychologist. And today I have with me Lowry Roberts, Assistant Educational Psychologist. Today's session is talking to teens. Thank you for joining us.
So let's get started then. So why exactly have we chosen to talk about teens today, Caris? Why not all children? What's so special about teens?
Yeah, good question, Lowry. What we know is that the teen brain is very different to children's brains and adults' brains. They're going through a huge amount of change, both physically, and we talked a lot about that in last week's session about the physical changes that goes on with the brain. But the reason that we wanted to do today's session is because we know there's a lot of negative beliefs and misconceptions about teenagers and their behaviour. For example, we hear things like, they've got raging hormones that drive them mad, and, they're drama queens, they exaggerate stories and tell lies. You've got other people and parents telling you, you wait till your 10-year-old turns into a teen. They feel, there's a period of massive immaturity, they're the clowns, they do silly things. And these beliefs can really impact on how teenagers view themselves, but also how we perceive them as well. We kind of dismiss sometimes their behaviour as being, irresponsible, and, they need to grow up. They need to stop behaving like this. And, that's understandable when we think about the world and the environment around us.
So what are some of the things that the teenage brain can do then? Are there any positives?
Absolutely, there's loads of positives. So there's one thing that I'll mention that again is that emotional response. So when we hear about parents and other people talking about these mood swings and irritability, yeah, that's real. That's a real thing that they're experiencing. The emotional brain, it's so more intense and influential part of their brain. So when we think about that problem solving logical part of their brain, their emotional brain is actually driving them far more than that side of things. So that's why we do see them and perceive them as being very kind of erratic and moody, but that's really difficult for them. These emotions are really intense and can be not only confusing for us as adults around them, but also for themselves too, to have those huge fluctuations. Emotions are there as a way to get us to do actions. You feel an emotion and then you tend to do something with it. And that's a natural response. If you're angry, you'll storm away. If you're upset, you'll cry and seek comfort. And those are really important factors to be considered. These emotions shape how we see the world and how we think. These overdramatic and hyperliteral responses are a normal part of being a teenager. So, for example, I'll say to you, teenager, right? You're not when there's no pizza, and a teenager will be like, oh, for goodness sake, I was really looking forward to that. And so you're saying no pizza. And it's like, well, no, not tonight. We're going to have it tomorrow night. But, and again, it's about the way the teenagers perceive our language and our intentions. We do find that our teenagers will naturally respond more negatively to things, and that's their way of trying to understand the world. Research has shown that when people, so children, teenagers, and adults, are shown the same image of a facial expression, we found that the child and the adults would say that facial expression was neutral. So neither happy nor sad or angry. It was just a kind of neutral, plain expression. And what they found in that research was teenagers all said that that facial expression was a negative, angry expression.
That's really, really interesting, Caris.
Yeah, because what that shows with us is that our teens are far more cautious and vigilant to our facial expressions. So it's to be mindful, like, for example, a pupil in school may think that the teachers don't like them. Well, actually, it's not that teachers' facial expression. It's just actually how the teenagers are perceiving those facial expressions. So again, that emotional brain can really confuse our teenagers and be sort of a misconception of reality.
So from what you're saying, teenagers have a very, very powerful emotional brain, which can make them maybe seek different things. Would you say that's right? Different novelties?
Absolutely. So part of that huge emotional side of their brain, that social part of their brain is very big as well. So that is all about when we're thinking about evolution, for example. So the changes of the teenage brain is all part of the evolutionary process. It's necessary in order for our species to grow and be successful. So when we're thinking about parts of the teenage brain that is developing, that social aspect is very big as well. They desperately want to be with their peers. They want to be around others. They're seeking to be with groups because that's part of safety, and that's part of their goal in life is to fly the nest, as it were. So we see it in other species as well. They club together. When we see sea turtles going into the sea, they'll tend to club together. Penguins, we see it. Birds is also, they all tend to congregate together because it's safety in numbers. Now, what our peers our teenagers are doing is like they have this like life or death feeling that they need to have certain things. So, for example, I desperately need these trainers that cost £150, and it's so important to them that they have these to fit in with their peers, because their peer acceptance is so, so important to them. And that's exactly how they're feeling. So they're not being selfish. They are actually finding that's a really important part for them to be able to feel part of that group. And again, needing to go to that party where all their peers are going, and they couldn't dare miss out on that. And that's so important. And again, it's that drive to belong with a group. We're thinking about how that belonging can affect us when we're thinking about, I know last week we talked about mirror neurons. So again, it can be very helpful and unhelpful, these mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are our ability to connect with someone else. So when we enter a room, we can be able to understand what they're thinking and feeling from our connection with them. And what we'll tend to do is kind of mirror their behaviors, like imitate their behavior, and we can empathize with them. So for example, it's really helpful that, say, when we go into a new workplace, our mirror neurons will explore the social aspects of that group in the workplace, and we'll try and replicate those behaviors. Now, unfortunately, sometimes it can be negative, where our children, our teenagers will mirror the behaviors of more negative influences on their lives. And that's something that we need to be mindful as well. Their morals, their beliefs and interests can be really influenced negatively.
It sounds like it's definitely a balancing act, isn't it? Because they've got this brain that maybe wants to sort of seek novelty and new experiences. And I suppose what we're trying to do is find different ways to nurture that and their creativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about novelty seeking, for example, so we've got the highly emotional brain, the social brain. Now, the next part of the teenage brain, which is very different, is what you said, novelty seeking. Sometimes we can see this reframed as risk-taking behaviors. Now, what we need to be mindful, again, we're going back to the evolutionary process. So our teens are getting ready and prepared to leave the nest, to go and seek new experiences outside of the family home. The home is familiar, it's safe, it's certain, and what we're finding is that our teens are seeking new experiences, novelty. Now, what's happening in the teenage brain about that is the fact that they are novelty is triggered by our reward system. So our reward system in the brain is a process where we do something positive and we get a release of dopamine, which is a wonderful hormone to feel because it makes you feel happy, relaxed, calm, and you're more likely then to engage in that behavior again. So for example, when you eat a piece of cake and you just really thoroughly enjoy it and just have that warm feeling inside, or when you go for that walk on the beach and you're admiring the view and all the senses you're taking and you really enjoy that, you're getting a hit of dopamine. That's what gives you that pleasure response from your outside world. Okay, and what happens with our teens is that they have actually much lower threshold of dopamine receptors. So they actually need more novelty in order to feel that same hit of dopamine. So, for example, for us, it may be that slice of cake, that walk on the beach. They need something bigger and better because they're not getting that same level. So they seek thrills that are more likely to be dangerous then. And again, fitting in with their peers, we're thinking about that social aspect. When you think of novelty seeking together and also fitting in with their peers, they can then engage in more risk-taking behavior because they have this thing called hyper-rational thinking. So, for example, you've got a teen who's passed their driving test, they want to fit in with their peers, so we're thinking about that social aspect. That emotional brain is going, I'm going to feel good driving really, really fast. They're going to hit a dopamine because they're doing that bit of risk taking, that novelty seeking. So I'm going to drive really, really fast, impress my friends, feel really good about myself, have that hit dopamine. Now, there is a side of their brain because our teenagers aren't adverse to understanding risks. They know there are risks. We've done research on that shows teens understand risk. They know risk is there. But what is happening is this hyper-rational thinking connects to the emotional side of their brain, not the logical side. So when you've got two sides of, well, if I go really fast, I could end up getting arrested. I could crash the car. I could hurt people. Their hyper-rational thinking goes, yeah, but it's going to feel good and my friends are going to think I'm cool. So they will unfortunately go with that side of that hyper-rational thinking. But again, you know, it is part of being a teenager and an adolescent because this actually makes them more courageous. You know, so this hyper rational thinking isn't always a bad thing. It actually makes them take good risks, such as leaving home, engaging in new relationships, traveling, getting a job, going on a training course, you know, so it can be a good thing. Another part of the brain that's really, really elevated with our teens is the creative side of the brain. So creativity in our teens is such a power. I always think that's such a superpower. What you'll notice in society these days that most of our entrepreneurs who come up with these amazing ideas that we wish we'd thought of before are actually very young, and that's that creative side of the brain, so able to see things differently and to come up with novel ideas in order to solve a problem. So again, this huge part of creativity is fascinating part when we think about their potential in life.
And I think what's key about all this is a lot of these responses, you know, like you said, come from that sort of evolutionary side, and they are hardwired. They can't help these responses.
And I know I can say that there's been lots of changes for our brain. There's lots more, but I just wanted to focus on the emotional, social, sort of risk-taking side of things. But I know it's not just our brains that influence our behaviour when we think about teenagers. There's lots of other things to consider. So, Laurie, tell me a little bit more about other things that will affect teenagers' behaviour.
So when we're thinking about teenagers these days, you know, the world is always changing, and our brains have to find different ways to adapt with the world that we're growing up to, and to cope with the environment that we're in. And the environment has a really, really important influence on the teenagers and how they behave and how they interact with other people. And when we consider this, we can sort of think of the environment as the environment that's really, really close to them. So as teenagers go through life, unfortunately to parents and carers, they are going to choose their friends over their family. And this can lead to some sort of dispute. You know, there's maybe an important family meal or something like that. And they go, well, I can't go. I've got to go out with my friends. My friends are really, really important to me. We also see this, you know, teenagers, you know, they've got lots of pressures on them in terms of their exams. And academic pressures, you know, people placing those sort of worries on them sometimes, which can be really, really hard for them to contend with. And a lot of the time, you know, these sort of when we sort of talk about these things, you know, we hear responses like, oh, it's just an exam, like, don't worry. But what we really need to be mindful of is for that teenager, that could actually be their first experience of loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first time that something maybe's gone wrong or something has changed. And then on top of that sort of immediate environment that's around them, we've got that wider environment. So things sort of like culture, social media, you know, we're all sort of aware, it's on the news, of the importance of social media. Teenagers these days have constant access to Instagram, Snapchat, the list goes on, meaning that they can always engage with what else is going on. And when we think about that brain that you've just, described, Caris, it wants to be involved, it wants to be part of a social group, it wants to novelties, that's going to influence them, it's going to change them, it's going to motivate them.
It makes them very passionate as well. In those, when you think about, recent events, with regards to like, protests and things like that, it'll often be our younger adults that are involved in that, because they is that huge passion for what's right and wrong, and it's affected all through what they engage with the world around them, isn't it?
Absolutely. So all these different things can influence how they interact, and even some of the labels that we hear, that are placed upon them, they're often labeled as this snowflake generation. And so meaning that snowflakes, are quite fragile, they break easily. They're often labeled as lazy, they don't want to work, they don't get out of bed, they're in bed till 12 o'clock. And all these different things. But what we need to be mindful of is all these can actually also impact on how they behave and how they perceive themselves. The language that they're hearing, these words of power, the influences from social media, these social media influencers, they have a big responsibility for our teens these days, and we need to be mindful of that.
And also, I think that's the difference, isn't it, when we're thinking about, the growth of all these things that you mentioned, social media. I think it's great when I tell kids that I'm actually older than Google. You tell a teenager that, they kind of look at you in disgust, but you tell a little kid that and they think it's wonderful. But again, that's something to be mindful of, is that all these changes going on, and adapting to this world. When you think about adults, we adapted to a world that was, we're talking 20 years ago. It was a very, very different world. And when we're trying to consider the way that we're understanding these teenagers growing up in this world that you've just explained, I can't relate, because I wasn't a teenager in that time. It wasn't the same for me. No. So I think sometimes what we find is like adults responding to these teenagers in this world that we can't understand from their perspective. We can respond in ways that are very unhelpful. When we think about, the theme of today is talking to teens, there's sometimes, like we say, we get it wrong.
And that's okay. We are sometimes going to get it wrong. We're only human. But these are just some of the things that we've noticed and I've done myself, that can be helpful to share.
When we're trying to parent our teens, it's a challenge. A lot of people describe how, having a toddler is very similar to having a teen in that sense, but much bigger, better language skills and everything, and more demands. However, sometimes we can respond in a way that we think are trying to help, but actually can be unhelpful. And like you say, we're human, we get it wrong. Some of the things, for example, is dismissing. We can dismiss their feelings sometimes because, like you explained earlier, you've got teenagers who are faced with things like social media and these influences on their thoughts and feelings, which affects their behaviours. Sometimes we can be a bit dismissive and go, just don't worry about it.
It's really not that big of a deal.
Absolutely. You wait till you're an adult, you've got to pay for bills, then you've got something to worry about. So dismissing can be really unhelpful, even though we're trying to go, look, you're making a big deal about this, just focus on something else. And that again then is a distraction. Look, don't worry about that. I'll buy you that top you wanted from Shein or whatever it may be. It's like, you try and distract them from their feelings. So for example, a child coming home from school saying, oh, well, I'm struggling in school, or I'm struggling with my friends. Don't worry about it. I'll do this for you. Again, that's in a kind of a saving mode, I'll save you, I'll protect you. Don't you worry about it. They may be having difficulties with their peers. Well, I'll have a word with their mother. So sometimes that's the kind of response we hear from our parents, because we desperately want to help our teens, but actually that isn't helping. We often can rush them because we've got our own lives. So it's like, come on, don't be silly, just get on with it.
Yeah, especially as well, when you've got things that you need to do, important things that to you might seem really small, but like we said, to that teen, that consumes them. So we try and rush them to make it quicker, but actually that just makes the problem even bigger.
I mean, when thinking about, getting ready to go somewhere. Some of our teens, they need a lot of time because it's really important that they leave the house looking and appearing in a certain way. So us going, come on, don't worry about it. You look fine. That's not helpful for them because to them, it's really important. Punishing, again, you do that again, I'm going to take your phone off you. You do that again, that's it, you're not going out for a week. Okay. And you're not seeing your friends anymore. These kind of things that, again, we're trying to kind of put those boundaries down, and like we're getting it just a bit wrong. What I want to really share here is those adult expectations, because often we'll go, look, you're an adult now, you want to leave home eventually, you've got to be more responsible, you've got to do this, you need to be this, those adult expectations, parents kind of feeling upset that their teen doesn't text them that they love them, and they're not like as emotionally available as what they were when they were younger. Our teens are going through so many changes, and it's not because they don't love you, and it's the fact that their brain is very different to how they were when they were little. And it's so important for us to understand that the storming off and the huffing and the slamming the door, that is to be expected, because those emotions that we know that are going on in the brain are very, very big. It's a lot for them to cope with.
So we've got some different ways here where maybe, and we've shared some examples of how maybe we sometimes got it right, sometimes got it wrong. But how do we respond then? What do our teenagers need to be able to communicate with us?
Oh, well, so first things first, I always say is be present, okay? And it may be a very obvious thing to say. However, how many times do we see families together, maybe at a restaurant, all on their phones? They're not present with each other. They may be walking the dog and on their phones. Phones, are very, very distracting. Again, you might have come home from work and you've got so much on your mind. Your teenager asks you something or wants to tell you something, and you've got to get dinner ready.
Especially when you're in the middle of that juggle struggle, isn't it? Where you've got a million and one things to juggle as an adult, but you've got a teenager who's going, I need this scene to now.
Yeah. And they may not be saying that, but you've got to be aware. So being present is noticing as well. Noticing when your teenager isn't quite acting themselves, because a lot of our teenagers won't go, I need to talk to you, I've got something that worries me. They're not going to say that. Often they'll bottle it up because they've got these big feelings. And actually, when we say about that emotional brain being so big, that problem solving part of the brain isn't going, I'm wondering why you're feeling worried or stressed or sick, or that you want to run away, or whatever it may be. It's about trying to understand that part, and that's where we need to be present to notice. And again, once we've noticed, and once we've said to our team, do you know what, I can see that it's really important that we have a chat. Right now, I've got to make dinner, and I really want to spend some quality time with you after dinner so that we can have a proper chat. Okay, so it's okay to put that boundary in to say, look, I can't do it now, but I've noticed that we need it. Okay.
And I think that's a big thing for our teens, isn't it? Just to be noticed and acknowledged.
Absolutely. The next thing we need to do, so once we're present, once we're able to give our teen that time, what we need to do then is validate emotions, okay? Not behaviors. So, for example, a teen storms off, slams the door, okay? I don't go, why did you slam the door? It's about, I can see that you're really angry and upset. It's about validating, and I can understand why you're feeling really angry, upset, because it was really important to you to go to that party, and I've said no. And that is not saying it's okay to go storming off and slam the door. However, when we're thinking about how the brain works and the emotional response, they need to stomp up those stairs. They need to use up that cortisol and from that frustration in their body and that adrenaline, and stomping up the stairs is actually really helpful for them to help regulate these difficult emotions. So when we're validating emotions, we're saying, do you know what? It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be worried. So even though I'm not worried about doing exams right now, because I've done exams plenty of times in my past, it's not that kind of language. We want to say, I can understand why you're feeling really worried about exams, because it's your first time doing them and it's really important to you. And that's the kind of language we want to try and use. So it's not making our teenager feel even more stressed and worried about exams, or a new experience, whatever it may be, it's about validating to say, I get it and it's okay. They feel supported in that moment. Now, if you get it wrong and they say, no, I'm not feeling worried or stressed, that's where you're curious. That's where you need to say, tell me more, help me to understand. And they're like, you don't get me. You don't understand me. Well, help me to understand you. Tell me what's been going on. Be curious, ask more questions, okay? Because that'll help them to verbalize those emotions. Because remember, our emotions affect our behaviors. But what affects our emotions is our thoughts. And often our teenagers aren't quite linking up the thoughts with the feelings, because ultimately, again, when we're thinking about that brain, that emotional side of the brain is very powerful. Again, once you've been curious with your child, so we're talking about being present, being there, validating the emotions, okay? Being curious, getting some more information, being honest and open, okay? This is really important.
I think it's so important as well for our teenagers, because they will tell you exactly how it is when they know when you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes, as to say.
Yeah, and they'll often think you're trying to hoodwink them. They're often trying to think, oh, you're trying to trip me up, so I tell you all this information and then you're going to go mad. Again, that links us in with creating emotional safety. So, for example, I can see that something's on your mind. I can see that because you don't seem yourself. You seem a bit worried. Can you tell me more? I promise I'm not going to go mad if that's what you're worried about. I won't take your phone off you. It's about creating that emotional safety. I'm here. It's okay to have these feelings. I'll help you through it. Doesn't mean that you're okay with the behavior. It doesn't mean that. Your child may have said some unfriendly things online to a friend or something, and it's been brought up, and they're feeling really shameful and guilty, but also hurt by that. Sometimes they feel like they can't tell you because you won't understand, because you don't get it, and you don't have to get it, but you can validate those feelings and create that emotional safety about, you just tell me and I'm going to help us work through it. And avoiding negative labeling is really important. Oh, you're so silly for doing that. You shouldn't have done that. You're such a nice person and you've gone and done something like that. That kind of language is not helpful. Okay. What we need to be doing is like, look, you made a mistake, you made an error, and we do that as humans. Let's see what we can do together to help get through this, okay?
And I think as well, when teenagers are going through these challenges, you were mentioning big emotions there, such as shame and guilt, remorse, and those are really difficult for an adult to understand, let alone a teenage brain, which is at the stage of development that it's at. And I think by avoiding those negative labels would be really, really helpful there, because it validates them and it doesn't grow those horrible feelings that you get in the pit of your stomach even more.
And again, it's about, when we're labeling with validation, it's about labeling the feelings, not the actions and behaviors. Okay, so it's not about saying, oh gosh, what you did then was really embarrassing. I can understand why you feel embarrassed. No, it's that it's making it worse, but saying I can understand how hurt you feel and how embarrassed you feel, and that's not a nice feeling. That's all you need to say, to be able to validate. We don't have to be trained counsellors to do this. We can support our young people and our teenagers at home to have that emotional safety within the home. And again, avoiding those negative labelings, is really, really important. Setting clear boundaries is the next step that we'd want to go to, is going, do you know what? Okay, you're feeling this way. This has happened. We've gone through that curiosity, finding out about what's happened. And we know it's not okay to do that. What are we going to do now? How are we going to sort this out? How are we going to make some changes here? That encourages independence, and that's really important. Our teens want independence, but again, it's like giving them keys to a car without giving them driving lessons, okay? We want to be able to encourage that independence, but in a supportive and helpful way. So it's about teaching them life skills, helping them to become more resilient. We're going to be talking more about resilience next week's episode, so I won't go too much into that, but it's about helping them to explore their world, not only about their thoughts and their feelings. So when we're linking back to last week's episodes, when we're linking in thoughts, feelings and behaviours, what we need to be thinking is about how we can enable our young person, our teenager, that it's okay to make mistakes. How are we going to change that problem solving side, which then develops that resilience? They become more resilient when they overcome adversity. You can't teach resilience. You can only learn resilience from overcoming negative experiences. And that's what helps to build what we call the internal compass. Because what's so important here is we've talked a lot about the brain and the influence of emotions, social aspects. What we need to do is help them to develop their internal compass, which is their individuality. Okay, that helps them with their creativity and their the independent skills. So that internal compass is all about what's your gut saying to you. Okay, let's link in what our body's feeling, because often we'll feel frustration and anger in our fists. We'll feel upset and happy and nervous in our tummy. What we need to do is to help our teenagers to link those together, to say, look, how are you feeling, and what's your instinct telling you?
So if I had maybe a teenager who's, a lot of the time teenagers are bigger than us, they're quite strong, they're quite big, and they're feeling these big sort of emotions. How can I help them link that then, Caris? How can I get them to recognize that? They're saying stuff like, you're ruining their life, they're slamming doors. What do we do?
No, and again, we're going back to that perception of these drama queens and raging hormones. And I think what's really important is that supportive role to go, it's that validation again. It's about understanding where it's coming from, and also helping them to understand their brain at the moment as well, because their brain is going through so much changes. We need to give them the information about that, the psychoeducation about what's going on here. The more we talk to our teens and our children about how their brains work, also how they can't be very helpful to us sometimes, is really helpful in order for them to be able to develop these coping strategies, because it's okay not to cope. Okay, we live in a world with Instagram and Snapchat, where everyone posts all the perfect life skills and all the experiences they've got and they're having, and what we don't see is reality anymore. And that's something we need to be able to support our teens to feel comfortable in, is the mundane, and sometimes the unpleasant, because actually that helps us become more stronger, more resilient.
Yeah, it sounds as though you're really helping your teens by validating those emotions to problem solve around them and think about, okay, well, what can I do next time? And I think what's key is that with our teens, that might not happen straight away. We know their brains are at a stage of development with lots of different changes, and that can take time. Plus, they've got to have time to process it as a teenager as well, haven't they?
Absolutely.
And sometimes teenagers process it a little bit differently, don't they? They go sort of within themselves and they go quite quiet.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you've got these teenagers, like you described, slamming doors, they're quite outwardly kind of expressing these emotions and frustration, or even crying, and that's quite obvious to us then, isn't it? When we think about being present. One of the things I'd say is about being present is being present to those more isolated teens, thinking about, okay, what's going on here? Yes, they're in their room a lot. When I try and communicate and say, hey, how was school today? You get a shrug and a, whatever, and oh, it was boring, or I can't remember, and off they go, and they're in their bedroom locked away. What we've got to remember is that I think, our perceptions years ago was that teenagers all of a sudden go from this loving, gorgeous little child who wants to do everything with us to the Kevin, as we remember from Harry Enfield. That's not the case. This is a change. It's gradual. However, it can be intense in some circumstances, some parts of that development. And we need to be mindful is that some teens actually need that time alone. this social seeking side of their brain is actually for peers and not so much family members. And do you know, it can feel quite hurtful to some parents that, you know, their teen no longer wants to sit and watch telly with them and walk the dog with them and, you know, bake cookies with them anymore. They just want to be on their own. And that can be typically normal behaviour. We do need to be mindful of when it's more worrying behaviours, where we need to follow these steps here about being present, saying, I've noticed that you're more quiet, you know, and they might not be ready at that point that you've noticed to talk about it, okay, because they're internalizing, you know, but what we need to say that, you know, when I can understand that it must be something that's quite worrying for you to feel this way and to want to be on your own, but I'm here for you when you're ready to talk.
It's almost as though you've put that wedge in that door. And I know we talked about in last week's episode, you know, when we look at sort of dysregulation, often we, you know, view it as the teenager slamming the doors and externalism, but actually it's just as important, isn't it, that we're mindful of the teens that are within themselves as well, if they do take it into their room and notice those changes. And I've noticed, I can see. So overall then, Caris, we've shared a lot of information here, but do you have any top tips for today?
Yeah, so the first things first, I think it's so important when you're trying to talk to a teenager, we're often responding to a behaviour. So whether that's the externalising behaviour, where it's the slamming the doors and the storming off, you know, or we've got a demanding teenager wanting this t-shirt to have been washed and dried the minute you walk in through the door and you haven't done it, it's really important to them. We need to be mindful about checking in with ourselves. So am I right now in the best place to respond at my best to the teenager? And we got to, it's as best as we possibly can. It's not perfect parenting, never will be, but it's at my best right now. Just come in from work, terrible drive home, you know, I've got to cook dinner. I don't think I'm yet best able to respond to my teenagers' demands or their concerns or their worries right now. So that's really important thing to do.
I think that's really good as well, because you're role modeling them. You're thinking about how you're showing them how to problem solve out loud. So that sort of internal monologue in your brain, you're saying to them, all right, so this is what I'm going to do. This is why I can't do this now, but I still want to talk to you. So you're helping them problem solve.
Not dismissing, saying, look, I've had a busy day in work today. You're going to have to give me 5 minutes. That's been that dismissive kind of response. What we want to be able to do is say, do you know what? I've had a nightmare drive home. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be able to be able to chat with you then. I know it's really important to you, and I just know that I've got so much on right now in this moment. I just need 2 minutes and I can get back to you. And that's what's really important. And do you know what's really important as well when we're checking in with ourselves is to show our teens when we are struggling, okay, within reason. So for example, it's really important for us to go, God, I've had a terrible day on my walk with the dog. The dog went and ran off. I was so stressed and worried. I felt like panicking.
I was frightened, probably.
Absolutely frightened, lost the dog, you know, I was really worried, felt like I could burst into tears, or even say I did, you know, and I got really upset and angry with the dog. And, you know, it's good for us to explain when we are struggling with emotions as well, because emotions ultimately help us. They help get us out of danger, help move us and motivate us, help us connect with people. However, they can be sometimes a little bit hard to cope with when a situation arises that we feel anxious or worried or angry, you know. So it's really good for us when we're helping our teens to understand their own emotions and linking in those thoughts with the feelings and the behaviours. It's good for us to role model that.
And that's really, really important to help them to support them to problem solve, isn't it? Absolutely. Is there anything else sort of around that problem solving? You know, often, like, you know, we talk about that safe responsibility. We don't want to let them get things wrong.
Absolutely. So the thing about problem solving and like supporting them with that is not for me to say, right, this is what you need to do. Okay. So it's about the language. For example, you know, you're worried about exams in school. I could see that you found out you've been more curious. And it's not for me to then say, well, what you need to do is you need to revise more. You need to go and speak to your teacher. You need to do this. You need to, you know, that's not helpful. What we need to do with our young people is to help them to come up with the solutions themselves through the questions that we use. So it could be, I'm wondering what has helped you in the past when you've had an exam. I'm wondering what has helped you to be able to focus more.
Yeah.
You know, a child make it, you know, a teenager might come to you saying, I'm trying to do my homework and I just don't get it. You know, often we're in a position as parents sometimes that we're not able to help our teens with their homework because it can be something that, you know, we would have done years ago, and that's been pruned, that's gone. You know, we don't need trigonometry anymore.
And the way that we learnt it back then is going to be different to now.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we can still help our teens even though we don't have the knowledge, because problem solving and supporting a team to overcome problems and develop resilience isn't about telling them what to do. Okay, if you can avoid telling them what to do and just respond with questions, helpful questions, as in, I'm wondering what would be helpful right now. I'm wondering what's helped in the past. I'm wondering maybe what your friends have tried.
And those questions are definitely helping with, I suppose, the next step there. I can see the word curious there, because it's showing that you're curious. You want to find out more to support them to problem solve and ultimately build that resilience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, validating those feelings is so important to say, I can understand why you're feeling that way. Not, I know exactly how you feel because I went through exams, or I know exactly how you feel. I always wanted to go to parties and wasn't allowed. That's not validating. That is not empathy either. Okay. No. We need to focus it on the teenager and say, look, I can understand that you're feeling annoyed at me because I'm stopping you from going to that party, but I'm worried about there being you know, maybe alcohol at the party, and like worried about the effects of that. So that's why I've chosen not to let you to go. And I'm sorry that you're frustrated at me. You know, it's about validating those feelings and it being open and honest and explaining, because we need to keep that relationship and that support. And we talked about that emotional safety. We want our teens to feel emotionally safe with us, because what we don't want is for them to feel like we don't understand them. So why would they tell us anyway? And that's one thing, is about learning together about the brain and how we can help each other and support one another in order to be able to talk to our teens in a more helpful way to develop their independence and develop their resilience.
And I think that's key, isn't it? A lot of the time when we're working with our teens and supporting our teens, it's connecting with them. That's the hard side of things. And, you know, teaching them about how their brains work, that's sort of what we call psychoeducation, can be really, really helpful, because it's quite hard to connect with our teens, as we've discussed today. And it's a way in then, isn't it?
And the one thing I'd end with this is to try these things out. We're all learning together as well. So try these steps out, try these skills out, because, you know, in order to connect with our teens, it's a learning process for everyone. You know, don't be afraid to keep trying, even if you feel it's been unsuccessful. Often our teens won't give us that response that it's worked. They might just go away and ruminate on some of the conversations we may have had. But don't give up. That's one thing I'd say, you know, that they are going through a very, very difficult time. It's very challenging. There's massive changes, but again, this is building our future. You know, these teens are our future, and
this is a great time to do it, isn't it? This is a time where their brains are so active.
Yeah, lovely. So thank you, Laurie. I think we're on to questions and answers section. So we're just going to have a look at those questions.
See what's coming in. Okay, so we've got a question here, Caris. I'm a single mother with a teenage boy. He just wants to stay in his room all day. I feel like I'm losing him. Sorry to hear that you're feeling that way. He doesn't want to do anything with me, and I can't talk to him about anything. I don't know about football or gaming. Help.
Oh, okay. Thank you for sending this question in. And yeah, I can understand why you're feeling a bit helpless here, because often we find with parents, especially parents who feel they don't have anything in common, like, but this mum here with a teenage boy feeling that she can't connect because maybe no interests or experience of football and gaming. Again, if I think about the other side of that, we may have like dads listening that have daughters who are going through that stage of lots of makeup and
and puberty in itself.
Absolutely. And that is really difficult. I mean, what we need to acknowledge here is that we can certainly still build relationships. We can still build on that time together, that quality time. And again, I would say it's about scheduling it in, often if you invite a teenager to go on a walk with you, they'll often say no thank you, or something along those lines. However, if you say, do you know what, I've decided that we're going to schedule in some quality time together, especially if you are a parent with more than one child. Often our teens can go amiss because they're quite happy hiding in the bedroom. When we got our younger children who demand more of our time, it can be such a big change going, through that teenage year. So I would certainly prioritize time. So it'd be like, do you know what? On Saturday, me and you are going to spend whether it be an hour, 2 hours, whatever you can manage, and we're going to do something that we both don't know anything about.
Yeah.
Okay?
And
So
that fuels that sort of side of the brain that you were talking about, that creativity and that novelty side of the brain, isn't it? Because this is something neither of us have done.
Yeah.
And we can learn together.
Yeah. And actually, what is so great about doing something new together is that, all those mishaps of learning a new skill or doing something that you haven't done together, we're thinking about the dopamine. Okay. So whilst you're doing something new, whilst you're both learning and you're in a you'd be in a more playful side, because obviously this would be completely different for you as well. You're both getting those hits of dopamine. You're both experiencing that reward system, which means you're more likely then to do it again. So I'd certainly recommend for this mum to go and do whether that means like go rock pooling to find crabs, go do baking together, go for a bike ride somewhere new, do something that, rock climbing, for example. Wherever it may be, do something that you both haven't done before, have very limited experience of, so that you can enjoy it together.
And you can give them that sense of autonomy as well, and empowerment by going, you select something, I want you to find something different, isn't it? And it can be that then, whatever it is.
Please join us for next week's session. Always Tonnau Talks is held on a Tuesday, 12 till 1, where you can join us live and we'll be able to answer your questions. Or you can always listen on our YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you in the future. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch.